It says you're live. Okay, so
All right.
hi participants, good evening. Can you hear us? Can somebody just drop a message in the chat box if you can hear us? So I'll move forward. Mm. Okay, so yes. Thank you for joining, and it's very nice to see all of you back. And what it says that, okay, so it's very nice. We are already in our fourth session, and all of your questions from all of you are really encouraging, and it motivates us to do good in the next lecture. And that's how Professor Greenfield prepare for whole week to have or to deliver a nice lecture and making it so easier, breaking it into more simplest way to make all of you understand. And you all are the first Indian community of Professor Greenfield, and it's very nice to have all of you on board. I would like to make a few very small announcements today. So the first is regarding attendance. Many of you are asking me on email or on WhatsApp message. It was not compulsory. We didn't make attendance compulsory. But if you would like to have your certificate for the course, then you have to submit the assignment maybe in just two paragraph or three paragraph, right? A page where you can write about your reflection from the course, and you can drop your name in the chat box so we will be aware, or maybe we'll be familiar with all of you who attended the course really and seriously. Second thing is like some of you have wrote to me in person that sometimes it's very difficult, but it all is very interesting for you to attend and to learn these new things, because I understand in India how we have been taught about the social sciences, and how Professor Greenfield is teaching us is different and indeed new subjects for you. Seeing it is as an empirical, as in our day-to-day experiences, so it's very new thing for you. And I am sure in future you will be learning more. And I think in autumn we will be having next series, which will be devoted to various subjects on society, on culture, on nationalism. That is the core subject of Professor Greenfield, and of course align them with this with the study of comparative civilization. So I'm sure it would be of your interest, and you can show your interest by writing to Professor Greenfield, or maybe writing to me. And I would suggest you, if you have questions regarding all of your four seminar series, which sometimes we missed from the chat box because we have very less time, so you can write directly to professor, and I have already shared her email in the chat box, and I can also share it with you. And for the fifth session, many of you have indicated, I think we have already 80 plus participants who would like to have a video session. So the thing is, you may send your questions to Professor Greenfield, and she may select few questions for the next session, since we planned it for a hands-on session, and I don't think it is possible to discuss research area of 300 participants. So we will be little selective, and we will select few questions, and then Professor will see how we can do in the next session, right? Yeah. So that's all, and I don't want to take more time of yours. So you can continue, and yeah.
Thank you. So I hope that you're reading my lecture preparations, that they make you a little more prepared indeed for the discussion in class. And today we continue on a logical line from um, last subject, the subject of the last class. And as I mentioned last time, the cultural process is happening simultaneously on several levels. And those levels can be analytically distinguished from each other, but they cannot be empirically separated. To begin with, there is the level of the mind, the individual level, and the collective level in general, collective level in general. But in the latter, we discussed the mind in last class. This was our focus. And this time, we are going to focus on the collective level. So, on the collective level of the cultural process, one can distinguish three levels of processes of symbolic transmission. Transmission, the synonym of this word of transmission is tradition. Tradition means transmission. So we are therefore distinguishing three levels of traditions. The lowest level is the level of social institutions. That is, established ways of thinking and acting, as already Durkheim defined it, and it is still the best definition, in particular spheres of social life. So we can talk about economic institutions, family institutions, politics, etc. If you study sociology or political science, you usually focus on such institutions. They are autonomous cultural processes, which means they have regularities of their own or laws of their own. And this autonomy, in each case, reflects the constraints of the sphere of life in which they exist. For example, political institutions, you will realize, will necessarily be very different from family institutions, autonomous. The second level, the level above such social institutions, are functionally integrated, geopolitically bounded systems of social institutions. In the past, those were mostly religions. Today, when we talk about this level, those are mostly nations. And the autonomy of those functionally integrated, geopolitically bounded systems of social institutions is a function of the historically evolved characteristic image of reality in them, with the system-wide organizing principles, that is, systemic traditions, reflected in every institution, and in the shared identity of their members. Subsuming these two levels are civilizations, the most durable and causally significant levels of the cultural processes. Civilizations are family sets of such autonomous systems, functionally integrated autonomous systems, sharing the same civilizational first principles and, although not systematically related to each other, interdependent in their development. Simply, this can be described or visualized as nesting dolls. Are you familiar with those Russian nesting dolls? In Russian, they're called matryoshkas, and those dolls are like that. In a big doll, you have smaller dolls. So, this big doll can be considered a civilization. It subsumes smaller dolls. For example, this would be the next doll, would be the functionally integrated, geopolitically bounded system of social institutions. This doll will be the specific social institutions in the specific sphere. And it will be subsumed in this functionally integrated system. And then so on and so forth until you get to the smallest doll, which is the individual, subsumed under all the collective dolls. Would you know, reconstruct them? So this, it's a very good comparison, a very good visualization. But it is too simple because the meaning of social institutions extends far over particular spheres of social life. Functionally, as I pointed out earlier, culture is the process of transmission of human ways of life. The chief mechanisms of this transmission on every collective level are institutions or traditions, which are necessarily aspects of each other. Institutions, as I already said, are ways of thinking, established ways of thinking and acting. Traditions are spelled out institutions. That is, prescriptions or premises for or summaries and narrative of ways of thinking and acting. As explicit formulations of thinking and acting, traditions may be said to support institutions, while institutions which are expressed in thinking and acting perpetuate traditions, keep them relevant all the time, alive, developing. In addition to particular spheres of life, such as economy, literature, family, specific institutional spheres are exemplified, for example, by units of stratification as modes of being. In Weber's words, styles of life, such as castes, estates, or certain classes, such as the intelligentsia or the nobility. These are established way of thinking and acting, like members of such units. So members of such units, imagine, for example, a caste, whatever caste, have very specific ways of being. So these modes of being are almost identical to occupational groups and functional spheres of life in some cases, but in others, they acquire characteristics of identity communities and ethical traditions of various degrees of complexity and applicability. When the relationship between institutions and traditions is recognized, you understand that they are aspects of one another. It follows that both institutions and traditions may be specific to a sphere of activity, for example, family, science, literature, or they may be general to a community of identity, ethical, religious, national, civilizational, and cutting across spheres of it, spheres of activity in it, in this community of identity. As I explained to you last time, identity is the central process in the mind, essential for its adequate functioning and the survival of the individual. And therefore, general institutions and traditions override the specific ones and inform them. So, ethical, religious, national, civilizational institutions and traditions inform family, economy, politics, and so on. The more consistently an explicit tradition is formulated, the more durable it is. And only written language allows for consistent formulations. Traditions may contain again, think about castes. Traditions may contain elements specific to themselves only, whether they are specific to a limited institutional sphere, for example, economy, or general to a community of identity. In other words, they may contain elements which are original to a tradition, or they may contain such specific or original elements in addition to elements derived or borrowed from earlier or more general traditions in which these original elements are embedded or to which they are super added. Roots of all the recent, that is at least 500 year old written traditions are found in the three ancient, at least 5,000 year old traditions explicitly formulated in written language. And these traditions are the monotheistic one, the Chinese one, and the Indian one. These ancient, explicitly and consistently formulated general traditions are the three coexisting civilizations in our world, in today's world. All the more recent written traditions, general and specific, can be traced back to them. They contain the first principles on which all the more recent written traditions are based. So we return to those nesting dolls. Each collective level of the cultural process is the level explaining, subsuming, like those dolls, the similarities between particular processes on the level below it, despite the differences between these processes, which explain their autonomy and explained by their autonomy. So, being parts of the same institution would explain the similarities despite the necessary differences between behaviors of particular individuals, the ways particular minds operate in those institutions. Imagine, for example, students or professors. They're all different. Every individual is unique. But students and professors would all behave in a way similarly, and their minds would operate similarly across all those individual differences because they would belong to educational institutions, to universities. Belonging to a nation would explain the similarities despite the differences between various institutions in specific spheres. For example, the universities, the family, the economy, politics in the United States would share certain characteristics and differ systematically. What is happening?
It's okay, it's okay. Branch fall down. I'm so sorry.
And different, yes, uh, um, they would differ systematically from family, economy, the same institutions, politics, let's say in France or in Russia, the same institutions but in different nations. And belonging to a civilization would explain the similarities despite the differences between different nations. So, the United States, France, Russia, Turkey, Egypt, those who belong to the monotheistic civilization would share certain characteristics, bear a certain family resemblance, and differ systematically from, let's say, India and Nepal or from China, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, who would also bear family resemblances of their own. Methodologically, explanation and analysis of every institution or tradition must be based, first of all, on the consideration of the history of its original elements, that is, the elements which define this tradition in question and separate it from all the others, and then on the consideration of all the prior traditions in which it is embedded down to the first principle, so following the nesting dolls. The mind is the active element in the collective process, cultural process, on every level, constantly involved in their perpetuation and change, while being constantly affected, constrained, and stimulated by each of them. Civilizations constitute the independent and thus fundamental level of the cultural process on the collective level, in the sense of depending on no other cultural process on the collective level, but only on the mind in their origins. So they are a framework, the largest doll, see, the largest doll, subsuming all the others and subsumed in none, causally significant on every level below, and ultimately responsible for cultural diversity in the world. Until very, very recently, there was no satisfactory, that is, logical and meaningful concept of civilization. So-called comparative studies in the social sciences being based on a very vague notion of sociocultural process, as I explained in our first lecture. The idea of civilization in them, though on occasion used to a great fanfare, you might remember in the 1990s there was this book, The Clash of Civilizations by Huntington. It was completely meaningless. It did not correspond to absolutely no reality, but it was widely celebrated. So this kind of usage of civilization has not been of any conceptual help. The term, as in Huntington, was no more than a very highfalutin, very impressively sounding synonym of culture applied to an important, developed, complex culture as against an unimportant, undeveloped, and simple one. And so it was very commonly said that, for example, the Western culture is a civilization, but Indian culture, for example, is not a civilization. And often the word civilization stood, on the one hand, for a much less specific term, society, less specific than even culture, or much more specific term, religion. This is, in fact, how Huntington defined it. It was the rise of China some 20 years ago to the attention of observers in the leading nations of Europe and America that both made the meaningful definition of civilization possible and also made it necessary. And personally, it was the rise of China that caused me to finally abandon all hope in the social sciences and the possibility of their reform, and as a result, to aspire explicitly to their replacement by the science of humanity. The recency of this event made me discuss it in the present tense. Just a few years ago, I wrote about it. The decision of China to turn its nationalist energies to competition with leading Western powers for prestige and economic and political hegemony redraws the boundaries of the empirical world on the basis of which scholarship in the social sciences and humanities, rooted in Western traditions, has developed its understanding of humanity so far. The rise of China represents a unique event in the history of the Western world, for only of the relationship between this colossal society with the West, it can be said with confidence that for a very long time, running into millennia, the two have developed virtually independently from each other. Since 2008, the need to take China into consideration in the West has been undeniable. This new relevance of a huge chunk of humanity with its 5,000 plus years history, previously almost entirely disregarded and never systematically considered within the essentially Western, quote unquote, human science, not only adds an enormous new reservoir of data to it, but likely adding a new reservoir for evidence contradicting accepted theories, puts in question its fundamental assumptions. We may be faced with a need as well as an opportunity to reconceptualize the socio-cultural world. It is quite probable that our world, constructed by the social sciences as they exist today, which we equate with humanity and social reality as such, is only a part of the world, representing only a part of humanity and the particular form of social reality. Even the most powerful and generally applicable of our explanatory concepts, we must now suspect to apply only to our particular form of empirical sociocultural reality, instead of pointing to mechanisms operative throughout it. Running the gamut of all the Western social sciences, the rise of China undermines their claims to universality and objectivity. So, even if I did not know the history of the social sciences, which I explained to you during the first class, now with what happened with China, it would be clear that the claims of social sciences do not hold water, that they do not have the right to claim universality and objectivity, that they are subjective. So the rise of China makes us realize that humanity is not uniform. It is divided into enduring self-sufficient systems which unite certain to a degree autonomous traditions and societies, despite the differences between them, and separate these traditions and societies, render them independent from other systems of autonomous cultures. Such enduringly independent systems can be meaningfully called civilizations, justifying the addition of the concept of civilization to the analytical inventory of the study of humanity, because it captures an additional variant of the cultural process. It points to another empirical phenomenon. What makes civilization such a variant is the characteristic of enduring self-sufficiency, the independence of each civilization from cultural processes around it, which goes much farther than just autonomy. In order to understand any autonomous culture fully, it is in fact necessary to take the additional level of the civilization to which it belongs into consideration. For instance, if one tries to explain nationalism, nationalism would be very different, would have very different significance in different civilizations. For example, in the monotheistic civilization, as in Europe or wherever else in the monotheistic civilization, and by comparison in India, the same would apply to democracy. There is no democracy that can be explained, evaluated, interpreted on its own. It must necessarily take into consideration the civilization within which it is being developed. The juxtaposition of China and the West specifically allows us to define civilization as follows. A civilization is a distinct, self-enclosed, self-sufficient, and self-generating variant of cultural reality that, for all intents and purposes, independently of other such variants with which it may coexist, has developed over multiple generations, multiplying in the process its interlacing traditions. It is an enduring, self-sufficient culture with codified first principles, resistant to outside influences. Mega or meta culture, mega or meta tradition, allowing for the existence of numerous specific cultures and traditions within the same set of first principles. In this context, enduring means spanning many generations, at least 5 centuries. And first principles refers to binding, unquestioned values, ideas and modes of thought that determine existential experience. And codified first principles means principles embodied in the written language and transmitted through language itself. The more explicitly and consistently a tradition is formulated, the more durable it is. Written language allows for the most explicit and consistent formulations. This definition fulfills the methodological requirement of possible answers to the questions why and how it exists. That is, why and how civilization is independent, durably self-enclosed, self-sufficient, and self-generating. It is so because it is has codified first principles, binding ideas transmitted through language itself, and determining existential experience. That is forming the mind, actually forming a special, distinct mind that cannot think differently. It is this paramount influence on the minds within it that makes civilizations resistant to outside influences, erecting barriers of disinterest on the way of cultural diffusion and influence. The definition, therefore, makes possible the examination of the core general question: what determines the area in which a civilization can spread? What puts a stop to the spread of one or another civilization? Thus, it makes possible the historical, geographical, empirical, and objective definition of any civilization. Among other things, this makes clear, for example, that what is called the West is just a part of a civilization belonging together with Islam and Russia, and properly called monotheistic. Its juxtaposition with China does suggest maybe a civilizational bifurcation, but it shouldn't, by no means, this civilizational bifurcation of the world, because Indic societies clearly constitute a civilization of their own. No other existing families of peoples, but Cynic and monotheistic, however, can be on the face of it claimed essentially independent from each other in the course of millennia. and thus mutually self-enclosed. One cannot say this about India very simply because India was for a millennium under the rule of Islam, and then for another close to 2 centuries. And yet, India is astonishingly self sufficient, despite this millennium long control by others, which of course makes its self sufficiency even more impressive, if anything.
Thank you, Professor. So we have, I can see a lot of questions and a lot of interesting questions. This one is from Dr. Minarul, and he says, "Greeting, Professor. If the biggest doll represent the civilization, which of the dolls represent the state?" And then, secondly, I have a question related to pedagogy, and that is, what is the best method of teaching political science in the classroom? He's already a professor, so he'll take.
Mm-hmm. No, this is a complicated and kind of multiple question.
Mhm.
So, if the biggest doll represents a civilization, the state represents a particular institution, a political institution within the functionally related system of social institutions. So I would say I would put it in the third doll, not the second. Second would be the functionally related system of institutions based on a particular historically constructed image of reality. The other question was pedagogical, you said?
Yeah.
And it was how to teach political science
Sciences in the classroom.
in the classroom. I would suggest, I expect you're a young person, um, and I would suggest that you be brave and give up teaching political science as it is established today, completely subjectively on the basis of Western experience. And as such, it cannot teach one much that is useful and applicable to the institution of politics. That instead you give up this entire Western, very specifically American, idea of social science and opt for a science of humanity as I tried to present it in those 4 lectures. Focusing on the political institutions. There are enormous, of course, scope to teach about important political institutions. For example, to teach about nationalism, which is the most important political force today, you would have to focus on political institutions, to teach about the state, to understand the state, to understand how the state is connected to nationalism would be very important. To teach about democracy. For example, democracy in India, from the perspective of the objective human science, science of humanity, would be a very great contribution to your students. And there is, of course, more and more and more than that.
This next.
Yeah.
So next is from Amin from IIT Indore, and he said that I really liked your example and teaching from this doll, and he says that on Huntington's civilizational thoughts, is the territorialization of civilizations a modern invention or a continuation of older imperial instincts in a new form? Or has globalization weakened the territorial logic of civilization or paradoxically reinforced it through new boundaries like digital surveillance and special economic zones?
Wow.
A long question.
Yeah, it is a long question and very, very complex and very important. Humanity is a cultural reality. It is a symbolic reality. And as such, it is an historical reality because symbols necessarily change with context. It is not a geographical reality, not essentially a geographical reality. The territorial extent of civilization depends how far a civilization extends, depends on when it meets another civilization. Civilizations, because of their impact on the mind, you see, they form the mind because they are perpetuated through codified principles in language, through language. They influence the neurological structure of the brain and make the minds formed in different civilizations essentially different from each other. Because of that, when one civilization, it's very easy for a civilization to attract uncivilized minds, minds that do not have their own civilization. So long as a civilization extends or just exists, surrounded by non-civilized minds, they will tend to join it. It will suck them up, you see, and make them part of themselves without any conquest, without any use of strength. But when it meets with another civilization, civilizations repel each other like magnets, similarly charged. Magnets, they repel each other. India actually provides a fantastic example, just amazing example of that. Because India was conquered by a different civilization and existed for 1,000 years. 1,000 years, you see, is a huge amount of time in human history. Think about the fact that United States, the most powerful nation, the greatest political and military and economic power of today, only next year will be 250 years old. Now compare this to the period over which Islam controlled India. The period over which Islam controlled India. It was absolutely rational for Indians in this very long period to convert to Islam. That would be the absolutely rational action. And think how very few proportionately Indians did convert. The resilience of India, the absolute civilizational resilience, the absolute self-sufficiency of the Indian mind is astonishing. There is nothing like that in human history. What else does this person mention?
The second one.
Yeah.
Has globalization weakened the territorial logic of civilization, through new boundaries like digital surveillance?
Well, you see, there is no territorial logic to civilization. The logic of civilizations is cultural and psychological, mental. Oh, so there is no more. You remember probably if you studied Indian history that at a certain period, some high-class Indians started wearing British cloth and wool in your extraordinary hot climate. Three-piece suits. This was absolute idiocy, of course. Right? I mean, why would in India anyone wear three-piece suits? Well, at a certain point, there was such an influence. One had more prestige wearing these clothes than wearing normal cotton Indian clothes. Then Gandhi decided this is ridiculous. Of course, he felt much better wearing the clothes that he wore in this climate.
He himself wore it for a long period
Yeah.
of time.
Yeah.
And then he decided,
Yeah.
no, we should.
You see, so this didn't penetrate that deep. So it's the same globalization and globalization. India is global enough by itself. And when the Muslims conquered it for 1,000 years, that was pretty much globalization. Certainly not any less than it is now. No, you have to look deeper.
Want to take some more? I
Well,
think you already covered it. This question of how what is that? Uh, So there is a one more question from Shubham Patel, and you already covered it. It says, "How does the concept of codified first principle explains the resilience of civilization?" You covered it. It was in the beginning. So
Mhm.
this,
Well, you know what I suggest? We already had our hour. I suggest now that we have one last class. So you think about your questions and try to send your questions to us. This is in addition to if you want, in addition to the two paragraphs that we would like to have from you as to what you learned in this class, so that we would be able to give you a certificate. So questions is completely up to you, but if you want to discuss anything, please send those questions to us. We will then see, maybe some questions go together. We will uh, find representative questions, and we would like to answer them. So please, if you want to discuss anything specific, um, send it to both Monica and me. If you send it just to Monica, it would be good enough, because in any case
yeah, I'll get it.
yes,
You
we
can
would.
drop it in the group also. You can mail it to you because I already gave your mail ID. You
Uh-huh.
know. So
So, and what shall we do? And we would like to have them before the next class. Yeah,
okay. So
at least 2 days before the next class, so that we can go over those um, questions and select those that we will discuss.
okay. And we would be having next session on Thursday instead of Wednesday because
Thursday?
yeah, it's 1st of August. It's Thursday.
Are
First of
you
August.
sure?
Yeah. Usually we are having lecture on Wednesday. So today is Wednesday.
Yeah,
And
but
next
Thursday
Wednesday,
will be 31st.
okay, so we are I will update you. We'll be having lecture on 1st of August.
Yeah,
31st will be coming back. It
yeah.
would be late. So it would be on 1st of August, and we would be happy to have your questions maybe
Um,
by 29th.
yeah, yeah,
29th
yeah.
and 30, so we'll
Mhm.
have at least time. And even if you would be sending it just tomorrow or day after tomorrow, it would be very nice. And what else? For the civilization discussion we had, first of all, very much thankful to Professor Greenfield that we often think civilization as a blank sentence. I feel that the highest stage of cultural development.
Yeah.
That's it we know. And many of those scholars, big name, who wrote about civilization, they just started with this definition. And I all the time find it very blank, like how we are defining the very basis of the civilization. So it's
And
very
it is, of course,
nice.
very subjective. You know,
Exactly.
whatever I consider to
Yeah.
be more important, then it is more important.
Yeah. So consider like the history of Ottoman Empire. Within 200 years, it's like gone. And for India, we had a rule of almost 800 years of Islamic rule, of course, and then 200 years of British Empire. It's all monotheistic, colonial rule, you can say. But still, what makes India so resistant towards the conversion or towards the change in demography? It's really important to see now in this, to see things beyond Western objectivity or the Western idea of universalization. I will share the reading, the article which is openly accessible on the Comparative Civilization Review. your civilization article, which will you can read it further and can develop your questions and can send. And we'll see you on 1st of August. uh, you can send your questions to me again over email or to Professor Greenfield. We would be happy to hear from you, and that would be separate from the assignment work which you will have. So it was very nice to see all of you, to meet you, and it's pleasure to let you know that you all are the first student community of Professor Greenfield from India.
India, yes.
Yeah, and she really liked, how many interesting questions you all are asking. Very different from her American students, from her Chinese students, and from her students from across the world. So it's very nice. Okay, so
Mm.
do you want to say anything?
Yes, well, thank you. That's
Okay, so we are wrapping it up. Thank you. Bye bye all.